Welcome everybody to Adding Sublimation to an Awards Business. My name is Sean Rohde with JDS Industries, and just to give you a little background, I've been with JDS since 1998 and started out in sublimation. We wanted to do this webinar, and it's been a long time coming. We wanted to do this webinar with Sawgrass, and Jimmy Lamb has partnered with us to do this, and so I welcome him as well. This is being recorded, so if you need to access this in the future, you want to rewatch it, it's going to be archived. So it'll be on our website and Sawgrass's website as well in the near future. But I'd like to welcome you. We'll be taking questions at the end, and Jimmy's going to explain a little bit how this works, but he's going to be doing some presenting, and we'll take some questions at the end. So without further ado, Jimmy Lamb from Sawgrass is here.
Well, thank you, Sean. It's great to be here. You know, I love working with you guys. Your knowledge of sublimation is just awesome, and you're really good at helping people out because, you know, I've had the chance to see you in action there doing some of your live seminars. And for everybody out there, if you hadn't had a chance to go to one of the live sublimation workshops that JDS does around the country, very worthwhile. You get a chance to actually meet Sean as well and some of the other staff members. And I do speak at a few of those, and maybe you get to meet me as well. So my big question to everybody out there, are you leaving money on the table? You know, I've been in this industry for a lot of years. I started out as an embroiderer. Hard word to say, embroiderer. But anyway, I started out in embroidery, and then I kind of moved into digital. And I know most of you are probably awards people based on the topic, and you may be looking at moving to digital, or you may have already done that. But the reality is this concept right here, are you leaving money on the table, applies to pretty much everybody out there because you have clients that have a lot of different needs. And if you're only doing one thing, like in my case embroidery or in your case engraving, then you're only getting a small fraction of those needs taken care of. And those people are leaving you and going somewhere else to spend their money for all those other needs. So wouldn't it be great if you could actually handle those needs yourself with your business? Okay? So that leads to another question. Are you on the cutting edge? Do you actually have what it takes to be able to produce things that they want and be able to deliver it to them so that you're, again, making more money? And are you within your own discipline actually doing everything that you can? I mean, engraving is a great opportunity for business, but what about the people that want photo awards? Are you able to do that? Do you have a system that can do that? You know, as well as all those other different things that they want. So digital award products is something that's really taken off, and we've seen that at Sawgrass because of the fact that we are the manufacturers of sublimation dye products and systems, and therefore we're seeing what people are buying the systems for and what they're using them for. And a big area that we've seen huge growth is digital awards, where you're able to actually go in and put in full color graphics, put in photography, really capture the moment and take it to a higher level than maybe with engraving. Now, certainly this isn't meant to replace engraving, but it becomes a nice complement to it because now you have more options to give those clients to be able to hopefully keep them there, you know, in your shop. You know, with digital, again, the photograph probably means more than anything else. It's been said that no one ever throws away a gift that has her picture on it. Very true. And then when you're able to take a neat award product like this that has the look and feel of a special sports event and then add in that actual person who was, you know, receiving this award, that's huge. So if we add his name on here as well as that picture, takes it to a whole nother level. You know, just some other examples here. Again, there's, you know, interesting substrates, interesting ways to apply things. You can take just a nice round, you know, hardboard item like you see on the right and make it like a soccer ball, make it like a baseball, you know, basketball, pretty much any type of sports ball except football. We can certainly do that. And you're going to find as we go through, so we talk about some numbers, we're going to talk about some comparisons, you know, that the production cost and time is generally a lot lower with sublimation than it is with engraving. That doesn't mean that you should sell sublimation for less. You know, you really want to work through that marketing angle of what's it worth to the customer. And if they see if they perceive it to be worth as much as the engraving or more, sell it for the same thing, and then take advantage of that margin because it was a lower cost item to produce. And, you know, sublimation's moved on beyond a lot of different things. You know, we traditionally saw it on a limited number of substrates, but now JDS, for example, has acrylic products. They have glass products. There's metal products available. There's wood products available. There's stone products. I mean, there's just a wide assortment of products that can be sublimated, which makes everything that much more interesting. And you see here, everything there has been sublimated, and it's all full color digital imaging. So where do you really stand when it comes to new technologies, techniques, applications? Are you really on the cutting edge? Are you really offering the things that customers are looking for? Are you able to really fulfill all their needs? You know, that's a big question. So that leads us over to the big word here, diversification, because everybody has the opportunity for diversification. How you diversify is totally up to you. But you're probably going to find that if you're looking out there in the business world, that being able to reach out beyond just doing what you've been doing with your engraving is probably going to take you to another level of business, because of the fact that most of you already have a customer base. So you're not having to recruit new customers. You're just informing your existing customers you can do new things for them. If you take a look at this particular image, I love this image because it's such a great example of diversification. Now, I don't have any engraving on there, okay? But what I'm saying here in the background is you can see over in the center back, that's embroidery. Over here is screen printing or direct-to-garment. I started as an embroiderer. I could not do all these other things out front, but my customers wanted these things, so they went somewhere else to get them. You know, screen printers have the same problem. Engravers have the same problems. If you're in engraving, you can't do all these things, but people are still buying them. So that means they're going to leave you, go somewhere else to buy those other things. You like to keep that money in your pocket, and you also want to make sure that if they go somewhere else to get these other neat products down here, like promotional products and spirit products and whatnot, that same source isn't doing the same thing you are in terms of maybe engraving, such that the client maybe doesn't need to come back. So diversification helps put more money in your pocket and keep your clients pretty happy. You know, if you're in the schools and sports, and you probably are, you're doing a whole lot of things right now, you know, standard things, the trophies and the plaques and those types of awards for, you know, a different variety of activities. But if you actually look at what you can do with sublimation, not only can you do the photo awards, you can start doing all these other kind of things too, and that's what I mean with diversification. You can do apparel suddenly. Kind of hard to engrave a shirt. You can do it with laser though. Okay, I know that. But for the most part, it's hard to do full color imaging on shirts with an engraving system, right? So, you know, if you were able to do sublimation, suddenly you got all these other things that you can offer every one of your school clients. Yeah, same thing goes for the corporate world. You start looking at what you're doing with the corporate niche and the different small businesses out there, and maybe special events and nonprofits. You know, there's a whole bunch of these different types of groups that might be in your client mix. Well, again, what all can we do that, you know, for them with sublimation? Well, certainly we can do awards, but we can do signage. We can do full color signage, okay? Ideally indoor signage, whatnot. Promotional products become huge that we can add in as well. So again, we're taking that existing client, but we're opening the doors to a whole lot more products and more income into our hands. So the key here is grow from within your customer base. According to the Ad Specialty Institute, ASI, it takes approximately 6 times more energy, effort, and cost to recruit a new customer as it does to service an existing one. So if you have this nice big pie of existing customers, if you add a new technique like sublimation, not only are you getting a new technique, you're getting multiple types of product lines you can produce. You go back to every one of those customers and say, hey, look what I have. It's a lot easier than bringing in a new client. So that's the key with diversification, what it can do for you. Okay, just real quick, things like the apparel products. Went a little fast. Promotional products. And the idea here is I'm trying to show you as many different pictures of different things, because if you're not really familiar with sublimation, I want you to be aware of just so many different things out there in the marketplace that are designed for sublimation. We're going to talk about exactly how all that works, too, here in just a minute. Indoor graphical signage, and it is true, sublimation is not UV resistant, so long-term exposure to the sun is going to make something fade. So we tend to recommend stick with indoor graphical signage more than outdoor, unless you're looking for recurring income, because if you actually do outdoor stuff for a client and say, hey, listen, this is probably going to fade over the next 2 years, and they expect it to fade, then they're not going to be mad when it fades. They're going to come back and buy more. I'll consider that recurring income. But for the most part, understanding that it will fade, you want to make sure your clients understand that as well. Okay, sublimation can definitely make a difference to all this. So let's talk a little bit about what sublimation is and how it works. Because for a lot of people, when they hear the word sublimation, they have no idea what I'm talking about. That's okay. So Sublimation on the surface is a digital printing process. Looks just like digital transfers, which you may be familiar with. But it's uniquely different in the chemical process. When we're sublimating something, we're actually dyeing it. Okay, dye is a D-Y-E, not killing it, right? If you're printing something, you're adding color to basically the surface of whatever it is that you're printing on. Okay, whether it be apparel, whether it be hard or whatever, you're putting ink on the surface. On sublimation, we're actually recoloring the fibers or the surface that we're sublimating from the inside out. Okay, so we're recoloring it from the inside out because we're dyeing it. It's actually a subsurface application. So think of printing as a surface application and dyeing is a subsurface application. Now the key in that is if you print something on the surface, it can scratch off pretty easy. It can crack. It can peel with very little wear and tear, going on. On the other hand, when you put something into the surface, it has a tendency not to scratch, crack, or peel, so that it's more durable, it lasts longer, and looks better, to be honest. So with sublimation being a dye, that's exactly what we're doing. And the way this works is it's a bonding process that's done at a molecular level. Sounds really sci-fi, doesn't it? But really, if you go look at printing, if I'm using a direct-to-garment printer, for example, the ink itself has to bind with the surface. And with most pigment-style inks, you have some type of binding agent within the ink. Think of it as an adhesive. We call it binders, such that it's going to adhere. So if you look at direct-to-garment printing, for example, they're going to print directly on the surface. Then they're going to apply heat. Why are they applying heat? Applying heat is called fixation, so that it's going to permanently bond the ink to the surface. Basically, that heat is affecting those binders to make them bind with the surface. Okay, you see the same thing with most digital transfers. Digital transfers, most of them have the binders in the paper itself instead of the ink. But sublimation has no binders because it's a molecular process. So with sublimation, when we heat this up, because we're going to use a heat press, I'm going to show you how that works in just a minute. When we heat this up, sublimation dye turns into a gas at approximately 400 degrees Fahrenheit. And then between that temperature and the pressure of a heat press, that sublimation gas will then transfer over and permanently bond with any polymer-based fiber. And it can be polymer or it can be a polyester, but that's what it binds with. Now, at 400 degrees, those polyester and polymer components actually are composed of small cells or fibers, which will have a tendency to open up from the temperature, such as the sublimation gas can penetrate inside those fibers. Then when we remove the heat and the pressure, the fibers close back up and contain the dye on the inside. Wow, that sounds complex. From your perspective, it's pretty easy, as I'm getting ready to show you. Now, you might have picked up on that little bit of conversation that I used the word polymer and polyester a whole lot. True, that's the only thing that sublimation will bond to. So how do we sublimate wood? How do we sublimate metal? How do we sublimate acrylics? Very simple. Those products you will purchase sublimation-ready blanks from JDS that have either a polymer coating applied to it or a natural polymer-based type of product, okay, or polyester-based product. So those acrylics and the glass and the metal and the woods and all that, they actually have a polymer coating on them so that they're sublimatable. And a lot of those coatings you can't tell they're there, okay, and so keep that in mind because you'd be looking at something and saying, I don't see a coating, right, because you really just don't see it, but it's there. Okay, it has to be there. If it's not there, sublimation's not going to work. But trust me, and Sean will tell you more. Take out hundreds of different things you can sublimate. Hundreds. So then sublimation is known for its quality and resolution. You can really and truly do picture-perfect reproductions. We have pro photo professionals, such as wedding portrait photographers, who depend on sublimation for wedding portraits. And we have artists who depend on it for producing museum-quality prints that are added onto some type of surface and hung there in the museum. So you might be thinking, especially as an engraver, what am I going to do with pictures because I'm used to engraving? Well, see, that's the big difference with sublimation because you can now do those photo awards and photo plaques and those types of things, and you can do a really good job of it as well because sublimation can reproduce photographs to just the highest level of quality. Then you also have the opportunity to do apparel. Apparel's a little challenging, I will tell you that. But I mean, again, it's not impossible to do. You just have to kind of learn how to do it. And that's one of the things we actually talk about in the seminars that JDS does, and we'll show you how to actually sublimate apparel. So once you know how to do it, it's not so bad. But here's the key, okay? If you're doing stuff for the schools, there's a good chance you can sell them apparel too. Now, sublimation is only going to bond with polyester apparel, and the most popular polyester apparel is the poly performance apparel, which is the moisture wicking product, which is Under Armour developed. And everybody in the age bracket of the schools, and many adults, are all out there now, begging for moisture wicking products because they like the way that they look and feel. So sublimation, you can put in a nice permanent image that will not fade, crack, or peel when washed. The only time we have fading with sublimation is when we're in intense UV light, day in and day out. But as far as running it through the laundry, sublimation doesn't fade. So suffice it to say, we got tons of products, applications, and markets out there that you can sublimate, just tons of that stuff. And, it really opens up the doors for what you can do, especially someone who's in the awards business. So I want to walk you through real quick, just basic, show you how the sublimation process works. I know some of you are already sublimating, some of you are not. When we start talking about sublimation, first of all, the nice thing is the equipment is very low cost to get into, very simple. We need a computer with some form of graphic software. A lot of you using CorelDRAW already, so you already know how to use that. We need a heat press, and we need a printer that's been equipped with sublimation dies. And that's not just any printer, okay? Because of the technology, the print heads and whatnot, there are only a limited number of printers that can run sublimation die through them. Not really a problem for you because JDS knows which ones they are, and they do carry them. Now, these are off-the-shelf printers. They're not these $25,000 direct-to-garment kind of things that you run into at the trade shows. We'll talk about some of the packages at the very end, but in general, if you take the most basic startup, and I say basic, it's a great printer. I mean, it's the most popular sublimation printer out there, the Ricoh 3110. You're talking about startup cost in the mid $550 range, for the printer, the inks, and whatever. So you don't have a big investment here compared to some of your engraving systems, especially lasers. This is very low cost to get into. Okay. Well, we look at it and we call it a three-step process: create, print, press. Okay. First step is we're going to use some type of art program on our computer to set up what we're going to do. Now, one of the things that's, when you're moving over into sublimation, not only are you working with full color graphics, you're also working with what we call full bleed imaging, meaning that we're going to cover the surface from one side to the other. With engraving, you don't normally do that. But with sublimation, yes, we usually completely colorize the surface from one side to the other, because the majority of sublimation products come to you with a white surface. I mean, even if it's a nice cherry plaque, it's cherry wood on the edges and everything, but it has a white surface on top. That's the polymer coating, and we're going to completely cover that from one end to the other. Okay, and you'll see more examples as we go. So that means that I got to come up with artwork that fits my substrate. And you can see on the screen here, I'm going to use a coaster. I'm going to go with something really simple. Coasters are great promotional products, by the way. But I'm going to use a coaster. And so you can see here with the coaster that I have a template, and there's templates available for a lot of different products. And, I'm just using basically an electronic template of that coaster. And these are easy to create yourself. So if you want to create it yourself, all you got to do is scan a coaster in so that you can get the right size parameters, and then you can save it, as a vectorized file in whatever format of whichever program you're using. So if you have this nice file, let's say I saved it as a CDR, I can put that on the screen. I can take my artwork, I can group it together and use the power clip function, and what it's going to do is basically crop and resize my image to my template. Now, also I added on my template, it's very normal, by the way, that we make our artwork a little bit larger than the actual surface. And so creating this template here, the blue represents the actual size of that coaster. So if I scanned in that coaster and I've set this up, I would make the blue the actual true size. And then I've added this little green border here to give me a little bit of overage, somewhere in the range of a 1/16 to an 1/8 of an inch or so, probably about an 1/8 of an inch. So it's a little bit larger, just gives you a margin for error. You can do the same kind of thing in Photoshop using the layers function. All right, so I got my artwork set up on the screen, and now I'm going to go print it out. So I want to go print it out using my sublimation printer and using my sublimation dies. I'll call it ink, dye, back and forth as we go. I also kind of like to maximize production by printing out as many at the same time as I can. So in this case, I was able to fit 4 coasters on a sheet of 8.5 by 11 paper. And so I did a copy paste function, and I printed out 4 on there. And you print these things in reverse, and that's something that when you set up your system, you'll get reminded of that. And then what I took was my blank coaster, and I put a little bit of heat tape. Looks like Scotch tape. It's not. Don't use Scotch tape. This resists 400 degrees Fahrenheit. And anyway, I put it on there such that the coasters are lined up with the artwork. And you can see right there, see how the artwork actually sticks out from the coaster? Remember, the artwork is larger than the coaster. And then I carefully go and place that on my heat press. I'm going to lay it down on the heat press, and then I'm going to lay out on top of what we call a blowout sheet, which would either be Teflon or paper. And you'll learn that through your startup process. But you're putting that on there just to make sure your platen stays clean. No big deal. So we lay this down, throw a blowout sheet on top, set up the heat press for most things 400 degrees 1 minute. There are some variations between products, but mostly 400 degrees for 1 minute. So when we close down the heat press and set the timer, that sublimation dye heats up, turns into a gas, and then transfers from the paper into the surface of those coasters. Now that's important. This is not a decal. So when I get done, I open up the heat press and I rip the paper off and throw it away. It's not a decal. And I'm left in this case with 4 picture perfect coasters. Total production time on this, not including the artwork, was about 2 to 3 minutes from the print time and running through the heat press. So pretty darn quick. You know, that was the key. Pretty darn cheap. Sublimation ink is about 0.01 cents per square inch. So these things cost, a nickel each, maybe 10 cents on the max, probably about a nickel each to as far as ink costs. Ink, something you don't have in engraving. We do have. Okay, just real light, I'm going to touch on color management. That's worthy of a whole nother webinar in the future, and that's a nice thing. This is the first webinar event with JDS. JDS has more plans coming up. And Sean is just, he's brilliant when it comes to color management. So all I want to do is just really hit you real lightly on how it works because, again, as an engraver, you're probably not used to having to deal with a lot of colors, okay? So this is one of the biggest challenges I think that happens when you go from a very monochromatic process into a full color process because with sublimation, we can literally reproduce thousands of different colors. And one of the things you're going to find real quick, and this is with all systems, is that what you see on the screen is not always what you get coming out of the printer. Why is that? Okay. Well, there's a lot of reasons for that, but to kind of keep this simple, your computer screen uses something called RGB, and RGB is a way of creating color, and it's an electronic format for creating color. And your computer printer is using CMYK without going into all the different specs. That's a different way of rendering color. They're like 2 different languages. There's not like a direct matching color for every RGB color that you see on the screen to every CMYK color that you can create coming out of the printer. Okay, so you have this issue of what we call like translating French to English to Spanish or whatnot because you got to get that information, shifted out through there. And then you also have to worry about something called color gamut, which I don't have a slide for. I thought that I did. Color gamut is range of color, and monitors will show a greater range of color than will printers. So the key here is to use some type of defined range of colors that your printer is capable of producing with sublimation dye, and then sticking within that range of colors on your computer screen. Now, that can sound kind of complex, but what we recommend that you do is taking a color chart, and there's different ways to do this because I know Sean has a couple of different ways to do this. I mean, you can use one of the things, we do have a tool, Sawgrass, that we offer, but some people use it, some don't, of being able to use one of our color palettes, as we call it, which is a predefined set of colors for a certain printer. But you can actually take that color palette, and it looks like this on the screen, but it's bigger, okay? But I've just put this as a representation. You can upload that into CorelDRAW, or you can upload it into Photoshop, or you can upload it into Illustrator, whatever you want to do. And you're now working with a predefined set of colors. And every one of them has a name and a number, an RGB setting. Now you can go over to your printer and you can say, hey, I want to print that predefined range of colors all out because I want to create a color chart, kind of like a paint chart that you get from the paint store. So I'm going to go there and I'm going to print it out on my printer and then I'm going to sublimate it onto something because when it comes out of a sublimation printer, it looks kind of weird. The colors don't look right when they come out of the printer. It's only after we apply heat and pressure that we see the true colors. So I usually recommend getting like white metal stock and then sublimating your color chart onto that white metal stock. So now I have that white metal stock in front of me, and I'm sitting here saying, you know, my reds are not looking like my reds that I want them to look like based on what I chose on the screen. But now if I have a whole list of colors, including multiple reds on my sublimated color chart, I can find the one that looks the best because I see that as what the end result is. And here, this is a very small chart, but let's say that there were several reds, and this was the red I needed, but this is not the red I was getting when I selected a red on the screen. So I would say, look, this is what it looked like when it printed out. So I know what it's going to look like. Therefore, I'm going to take this name, and when I go into my software, I'm going to go find that one in the color chart. Though it looks wrong on the screen, I know what it's going to look like when it comes out. So that's a process we call spot color selection. There's a couple of different ways to do it. The main thing is you need a visual representation of what the final colors look like coming out of the printer, sublimated onto a surface, and those need to be clearly identified, and then you need to be able to access those same colors on the screen, so you're just choosing what you need based on what your output is. Hopefully I didn't make that too complex. So anyway, we do offer that, though there are other ways to set up color palettes, something that Sean's done a lot of work with as well. But that is something that we do offer at no charge when you're buying our ink systems. I also need to mention sublimating colored surfaces because we don't work with colored surfaces for the most part. You might have heard that sublimation only works on white. Not true. Sublimation actually works on different colors besides white, but white is the best color. For example, with apparel, we can print on some light colors, okay? But one of the things that we don't have with sublimation is the ability to reproduce the color white. See, the color white is not produced by a CMYK printer. It can't do it. A CMYK printer has 4 base colors: cyan, yellow, magenta, and black. So you create color by mixing those together, by sending coding that says make a certain percentage of each of these to get the final color. Well, there is no combination of C, M, Y, and K that makes white, okay? It doesn't work. So therefore, we can't reproduce white. So if you need the color white and you're printing on a colored surface, you can't get the color white. If you need the color white and you're printing on a white surface, the area of your graphic that needs to be white is simply left open. And your software does it. You don't have to really think about it. It's left open so that the background, which is white, serves as the color white. Okay? So I can print on light colored items as long as I don't need the color white. But the darker it gets, the harder it is to put sublimation color on it, because sublimation is actually considered to be transparent. Most digital inks actually are too, such that the background color can affect the foreground color of the image. So as I get darker with the background color, then there's less of the sublimation colors that really show up properly. So typically we say light colors are pretty good. Dark colors probably aren't going to work. You can do darks, you just can't see it. Okay. Now, here's a good example of what we're talking about with the lack of white ink. You can see that the Eagles looks great on the white t-shirt, and all the white areas are left open. But when I go to the yellow shirt, you see what happens is all the white areas are now yellow. So I needed white. I don't have white. So you might be, geez, I don't need sublimation. That's got to be limiting. But is it really? I mean, the reality is, as I'm going to show you in just a minute, the only time color is a factor is apparel. For everything else you ever do with sublimation, you don't have to worry about color, only with apparel. By the way, with darks, we really can't do darks, but the way that darks are done by people like screen printers, direct-to-garment, I always like to show it so you understand, is they do have an artificial white ink that they can actually apply. So they don't really print on darks either, but they have an artificially created ink, engineered, that can be applied and then cured either chemically or with heat, and then they put the rest of the colors on top. And that's how they get away with it. So they get a white base, which gives them brilliance in the top colors and provides white for those open areas in the graphic. You can't do that with sublimation because it would interfere with the process of the gas being able to penetrate into the fibers. So there is no white ink currently for sublimation. You may see things that have been sublimated, it's worth telling you about, that have the color white. And you're like, how did they do that? You said you don't have white ink. Well, what they did was they took a white garment, but they used a wide format system where they made a transfer that's as big as the front of the shirt and another one that's as big as the back, and they completely sublimated the colors of the shirt and the graphics all together in one quick application. You can do that to a finished T-shirt. These particular shirts have collars, so they were done during the cut and sew manufacturing process, but that requires wide format equipment. which is a totally different direction to where you want to go, probably starting up. But at the end of the day, okay, all that color problem is really only with apparel, because we normally do full bleed, I said, from corner to corner, edge to edge, and the 99% of our sublimated products come with a white surface, and we're just recoloring the surface. This square on the screen, a rectangle, that rectangle could be a wooden plaque. That could be a hard polyboard photo panel. That could be a mouse pad. That could be all kinds of different things. It doesn't matter. It's white, and it's sitting there. Now, when I get ready to colorize this, if I need it to be a black plaque, I don't buy a black plaque. I just put in a black background as part of my image. I just combine them together on the screen and put it all at once. Now, here's an example. I put in the wolf with a black background. I didn't start with a black plaque. I started with a white plaque, recolored it to be the exact color I wanted, all in one step, by the way, and left areas open that required white. Now, you might be thinking, wait a minute, but if you didn't put any dye there, can you feel that with your fingers? Does that look weird, feel weird? Nope. Remember, dye sublimation goes in the surface, so you have no way of rubbing your fingers over there to tell that there's no ink there. It's just the surface. Pretty cool. So really, this concept of not having white ink isn't really an issue unless you're doing apparel and you're getting away from whites there. So that's just something to be aware of. So what does it cost? Well, it depends on what you're doing. It depends on which printer you buy. We do a lot of cost testing and whatnot, and you can find this information on our website. On average, okay, on average, this is the image that we use for most of our testing. So just to show you the detail, on average, an 8-inch by 10-inch graphic is about 50 cents in ink and can print in under 60 seconds, under 30 seconds depending on which printer you're using, but I'm being conservative with the 60. So that becomes your ink cost. People are really concerned about ink costs. Ink works out to about 0.01 cents per square inch on average across the different sublimation systems. So it's not a super expensive process. To be able to print that for 50 cents, not too bad. And the fact that you can print it in under 60 seconds and press it in under a minute and get that much detail and that much color and that much coverage, pretty huge. Okay, startup costs. We're going to look at some packages that JDS offers here in just a minute. You know, we're going to assume you already have a computer and graphics probably. Some of you already have a heat press. Heat press is going to be your most expensive thing, and you want to buy a good quality heat press. I mean, I can't emphasize that enough because sublimation is so dependent on temperature and pressure being consistent. If you can't be close, you need to be dead on, okay? And getting a good heat press is going to last you pretty much forever, and it's going to give you that good quality every single time that you're looking for consistent temperature and pressure. Startup equipment costs, I put $500 to $2,500. I know that's pretty broad-based, but that's going from just starting out with basically a Ricoh 3110 all the way up to maybe a larger one and a larger heat press. And we'll look at some packages here in just a minute. Awards versus sublimation. I just want to show you something really briefly before we go into the question and answer. Keep in mind that what I put together here, I want to give you some real rough ballpark comparison figures of, what is it, what does the production look like on something sublimated versus something comparable engraved. And there is no comparable. That's the problem. So some of you really experienced awards people. Don't laugh at me, okay? What I did was I took something and I went to an engraving guy. I said, listen, if you had to engrave that from scratch and all the detail that's in there, what would that cost, okay? And I know there's different ways to achieve that in the awards world, but I needed to be able to compare. I wanted to compare like surface area, time, delivery, whatever. So please just keep that in mind. This is just all ballpark. And I know there's lots of variables because you have different variables, whether you're using a rotary or using a laser system. There's a lot of different variables in there. These are just meant to be real rough. If you're experienced with laser and rotary, you can be doing your own calculations right now. The one that I know the best is sublimation, okay? So if you're looking at this, we assumed across the board that maybe it was 10 minutes to actually set the image up. Pretty much equivalent across the board, probably setting up most of your artwork. In production time, and again, the engraver I worked with told me there were so many variables, but these are the numbers that we kind of roughed out. Bottom line, whether it took you 10 minutes or 18 minutes to do this with a rotary system, in sublimation it's going to take you about 2 minutes, maybe 3 on the outside. And then when you combine that in with your artwork, you can see, I can knock this out pretty quick, okay? in general, if I was sublimating it. Just like in sublimation, I wouldn't be doing that. If I was sublimating it, I would be doing something that was full color because I can. So that's what I say. It's not really apples to apples very well, but just try to give you a ballpark, okay? Again, your overhead's going to be based on, in this particular example, I went and tried to do some calculations based on your equipment cost, et cetera, so that you, whatever your hourly cost is. So what we did was we looked at hourly cost and we looked at production capabilities per hour based on this particular plaque on that first thing, and we came out that the production cost was about $6.84 per piece. For sublimation. My substrate was about $8, so it was about $6.84. Yeah, that was more than just ink. That's my ink, that's my paper, that's my labor in there. So, you know, realistically, I'm coming up to probably about $6.84 if I was going to do that much coverage there in that. But it was a little bit higher with some of the other systems. So at the very end, what I ended up with, I said, listen, if I was going to use sell this for $40, what kind of margin would I see? Now I realize that some people and I don't think this is the way to do it, trust me, from all my years of being in business, that a lot of times you'll go out and figure out what it costs and you'll put in a fixed markup. But the reality is you want to look at perceived value. That's how you determine markup. What's it worth to somebody? And if someone will pay you just as much to have a sublimated plaque as an engraved plaque, but you can produce a sublimated plaque for half the price, wouldn't you do that and keep the same margin? I know a lot of times people look at, well, it's cheaper to produce, so I sell it cheaper. Well, you can do that. It's your business. But I'm the kind of guy that I have a rule of thumb. It's Jimmy's first rule of greed. Charge as much as you possibly can. You know, I'm in business to make money, and that's what I'm going to do every single time. So the bottom line is the sublimation is quicker, and it has a lower startup cost and a lower operational cost, so you should be able to produce things quicker and cheaper with sublimation. It's up to you to how you want to present it as far as your markups. Because if you look at startup costs, and I use the extreme with sublimation, I mean, we got people starting up in sublimation. You're going to see start package in just a minute. We got people starting up for $550 all day long because they already have a heat press. Or, you know, maybe double that because they had to add a heat press. But I use an extreme, okay? I was trying to be conservative. I used 2,500 there. I looked up several different rotary packages, came up with a 3,000, and a laser at 10,000. I know lasers go way up. But just using those basic numbers, the idea was to say, hey, how many plaques would I have to do like the one down below to get my investment back? So all I wanted you to take from all this is sublimation is a lower cost alternative and a good complementary process to what you're already doing. It's not going to replace what you're doing by any means, but it's definitely going to complement what you're doing. Okay, some of the quick advantages of sublimation: full color and photographic imaging, fast production rates, which equal lower costs, diversification into new markets, easy upselling and cross-selling. So while you're selling them those engraved products that you do so well with, make sure that you try and throw in some sublimated products as well so that you're expanding the range of the order that they are placing. And then finally, we have those low startup costs. So our conclusions here. Sean, you ready to take some questions?
Absolutely.
And I'm going to move over to our email addresses so that if people do have questions, make sure I got yours spelled right there, Sean. If people do have questions, you can follow up later in case we don't get to your question, or you come up with something later because that's what happens. It's over, then you think of something you want to ask. Okay, Sean, first question here is, what artwork format is best for sublimation? Vector, digitized, bitmap?
Yeah, well, you can use either one. And if we take a step back a little bit, let's say whatever software you're working with, you can do a lot of things with each different type of software. Most people use CorelDRAW, but you can use Illustrator or Photoshop, and you can save your files as different file formats. But what you're going to be doing, what kind of graphics you're creating that will determine what kind of format you're going to be using. CorelDRAW can handle both vector art and raster art. So if you can import a photo into CorelDRAW, you can create graphics and text in CorelDRAW. You can do that in Illustrator as well. Photoshop primarily is for photos and vector raster art. So it kind of depends on what you want to produce. But I usually tell people, work with the program that you are comfortable in, because that's going to speed up production.
Excellent. Which heat press do you recommend?
Well, we typically use George Knight's here in our home office in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. We've got 7 of them operating right now, and we take them on the road with us. So they're good quality heat presses. If you're looking for a heat press, just make sure you stick with some that are the types that are made in the USA. For now, I have not seen a good quality Chinese heat press yet, but we use the DK20 and the smaller 14 by 16 size. They're all good presses.
Yeah, that 20 is a great press, one of my favorites. Okay, next question. Is there a polymer spray or paint or coating there that we can use to create our own coatings on our own products?
And the answer is yes. However, if you've ever tried to do this yourself, it is a bit of a challenge. So if you're a tinkerer, and I welcome experimentation. Sublimation is all about experimenting. I have done some experimenting with the spray, and there's sprays and there's things you can brush on. And typically the tricky part about applying your own coatings is getting it on evenly and curing it correctly. Also, you need a well-ventilated area because it really does create a stink. So when you're putting on the coating, it has to go on evenly. It has to be cured for a certain amount of time in an oven that you have to dedicate just for that, because you're not going to want to eat in your oven after you do one of these curing processes with the poly coating. So it's a process. It's a lot easier to purchase products already created for sublimation, but it can be done. And if you want to email me later about some different places that do offer this, I can get you those. I don't have that right in front of me at the moment.
Now, I'm a little contradictory to Sean. I agree with everything he said. My 2 cents says this, is that he did a good job when he said tinker, because on a day-to-day basis, you could spend way more time trying to do a coating than might be worth your while, at least until you perfect the process. And keep that in mind, you're sort of becoming a manufacturer when you're doing your own coatings. On a day-to-day basis, I always suggest, because there's literally hundreds of products out there that have been professionally coated, that you look for that solution first, because all you got to do is pick up the phone or go on the internet and order it, and you have it in your hands the next day, and you know it's good quality. If you are going to experiment with it for the next 4 days trying to perfect it, how many sales could you have done in the same time? So, it's just a word of caution. It's not to say don't tinker, because I'm just like Sean. If you tell me, first of all, if you tell me you can't do it, then I want to go figure a way to make it happen. Sort of a rebel. But just take that with a grain of salt. That is just not you taking a can of spray paint and spraying it on the surface and you're ready to go sublimate it. So I guess that's my main point there. Does that make sense, Sean?
That makes sense to me.
Okay. Let's see. Here's another artwork question. You mentioned original artwork being high quality. What do you consider high quality for sublimation?
Well, if we're talking about DPI level, typically you are going to want to sublimate or print anything at 300 DPI at the size that you want it. So if it's on a coffee mug and you bring in your photograph and you have to blow it up to fit the coffee mug, you want to make sure that that original image is at least big enough so when you blow it up it's 300 DPI at the size you're using it. And if you get something off the internet, it may not be 300 DPI, it might be 72 DPI. Those do not, they look good on the screen, but they do not sublimate well, they don't print well. So if it's a raster image or photograph, 300 DPI at the size you're using it is a general rule of thumb.
Yeah, just to tag on to that, being a guy, I'm the kind of person that if 300 was good, then like 3,000 must be great. But not in this world, because once you really get past that 300 that Sean was mentioning, you won't see any difference, but you will have larger file sizes. You may slow the printing down, and quite possibly you may be using more ink than you need to use because you have a DPI saying that you don't need to have. So definitely set it, this is not a case of more is better.
Yeah, and you'll see a lot of times printers will advertise what their DPI level can print at, and to be honest, most people can't tell the difference between 600 DPI and 1200 DPI.
Right.
But you can see the difference between 72 and 300.
Yeah, you can see that difference. You're right about that. Okay, so let's see. I have an order for 350 trophies, and they want sublimated plates. How do I go about doing these with a Ricoh 3110?
Jimmy, can you repeat that for me?
Yes. I have an order for 350 trophies, and they want sublimated plates, I guess, for the trophies. How do I do these? I have a Ricoh 3110.
Okay. Well, the best way to do it is to put as many plates on a page as possible. So if you have an 8 by 14 page size, that printer will accommodate that. Two ways to do trophy plates. First of all, you can sublimate an entire sheet of those plates and then cut them out, allowing yourself a little border so you can line up the shear to cut those out. The way we typically do it is we'll cut the plates first and then sublimate them. And the reason we do that is because when you're shearing metal, after you've pulled or peeled the protective coating and you're shearing that metal, those little pieces tend to drop on top of each other and scratch really easily. So it's not that you can't do it, but the best way that I found is to cut the pieces first, peel them, place them on the transfers, and then you can put on, use a piece of heat tape and stretch that tape all the way across a row of those plates, and then put them in your heat press. And there's a technique to doing metal that is a little different than other substrates, and we have instructions online for that. But yeah, you want to be as economical as possible. Obviously, if you just have one trophy, you can only put one trophy plate on that page. It's a little bit wasteful, but sometimes that's the way it is.
Okay, very good. Okay, I have a Go Uno printer. Is there a paper for it? Well, Go Uno is not sublimation. Go Uno is a different process, and they have their own papers. What is your tech support on your printers?
I guess that would be for me.
I think so.
The tech support, as long as you're a JDS customer, you get tech support for life, or as long as I'm alive. So hopefully it's for a while. So as long as you're a JDS customer, you get tech support for life, as long as you're a customer. Now the printers themselves do have a limited warranty. I believe they're 1-year warranty. But
okay, you showed black background for plaques. Well, okay, I did. I have not been able to get high gloss on Dynasub white. Am I doing something wrong?
Could you repeat that one too, Jimmy?
Yes. I have not been able to get high gloss on Dynasub white.
Okay. Yeah, this is a question I get almost every day. And the reason you're getting, and I'm guessing a little bit here, you're kind of seeing what looks like almost water spots on the metal. Looks like it came out of your dishwasher. It has kind of a scratchy finish. That's from the paper is actually starting to embed itself into the softer coating of that poly on that metal. The metals that we have, Dynasub, Easy Sub, Ultra Sub, they all have a softer poly coating. So when I put those in the press, I'm using really light pressure, and my dwell time is rarely going to be past 45 seconds, but it's really the pressure that is key. And also, in order to do that really light pressure, we use soft Viva paper towels. And this is not an endorsement for Viva, but we just happen to use that, and it works really well. Because if you use really light pressure when you're heat pressing something, your heat press is not perfect, so it might hit on one edge, but maybe not quite on another, so you're not getting a direct contact between the transfer and that piece of metal. So that paper towel, and this is a paper towel that has no printing and no texture, that paper towel allows you to get that direct contact. It opens up the window for it to work. So like I said, we have a video of this technique and written instructions, but that is more than likely what that is. It's just the pressure of the paper going into the metal. It's not, that doesn't happen with all substrates. It just happens to be that Dynasub requires very light pressure.
All right. Do you have a price list for a mug press, or how can I find out the price on a mug press? Would be the way to put it.
Yeah. I don't have that right in front of me, but a typical standalone mug press from George Knight is about $720, I believe. There is also the ability to use an attachment mug press. So if you have a combination mug press, a George Knight combo press, there is an attachment that you can get that doesn't have its own control panel, but can operate off the control panel from the main press. And that one, I believe, is it's around $300, I think. I'm not don't have that number in front of me, but it's much less because it doesn't have all the control panel, main board, circuitry, all that kind of thing.
Okay. Next question. Does the ink dry out if it's only used occasionally? And I'll let you answer. You're on a roll.
Yeah, sure. I tell people when you get into sublimation, jump in with both feet, and there's a couple reasons for this. First of all, samples sell the product, and as long as you're printing something and creating products, that's what's going to sell sublimation. The reason you want to keep selling products is to keep your printer running. I tell people to try to print something at least once or twice a week, and if you're printing samples once or twice a week, you're not only keeping your printer nozzles fresh. It's like, let's say I had a car and I didn't drive it for 5 years, so those seals and all those things start to leak, and you want to drive the car to make it run. That sounds kind of weird, but the more you use it, the more it's going to run. So that's the same thing with a printer. Ink does dry up. The Ricos have been very clog resistant, but they're not infallible. So we recommend keeping the printer on. It does its own little maintenance. But for the most part, this has been a big, huge help to the industry for sublimation. I think Jimmy would agree with this, that the industry has really turned a corner because of these printers.
Oh, I agree 100%. I just want to reiterate what Sean said about the auto maintenance program. You have to leave the printer turned on. We have people that will just turn it off. Want to say power, but it's really not using enough power to worry about when it's in a standby mode. But it can't do its automatic processing if you turn it off. So with the Rico, make sure you leave it on, and you should be good. Will Corel Paint 12 work for graphics image preparation?
Yes, it will. But you'd rather, if you have Corel Paint, I'm assuming you probably have Corel Draw as well. So while Corel Paint you can use to create things, oftentimes it's used as more of a photo platform. I don't think that there is not that I know of, I don't think there's a color management ability in Paint. So, and I don't think Sawgrass has created that. So usually what we do is if you create something in Paint, you just import it into Corel and print it from there.
What about the power supplies on the Ricos? I've seen some issues with that in the past. That was an older model of Rico. So if you're seeing that on blogs, you're looking at a Rico that has been discontinued and replaced. Rico did have some issues with some of those printers. As long as it's under warranty, they replaced it. Once it's out of warranty, they didn't replace it. Okay, next question. Let's see. Do the CMYK color numbers translate to Pantone color chart values? I know the answer to that.
Not really, no. Pantone is a whole different way of processing color. It's not really, Pantone is not used all that much. Where I use Pantone colors is through the swatches. So if you've ever been to Pantone's website, you can actually purchase one of their swatch palettes. These are great because you can look and see what those. You can show that to your customer and say, hey, pick a color, but you're not going to necessarily use those Pantone values when you print because it's not going to be translated correctly. Usually, what you want to do is create your own palettes that you use. And we have a lot of those palettes. We've actually created thousands and thousands of colors that are pre-created that we send out to people, that we put on our FTP site for download, and then you know what those colors look like. Like Jimmy was showing one of those palettes earlier, was the RGB palette, or what looked like the RGB palette. That's a good starting point. I usually print that out, sublimate it, and use that as a starter guide and work from there. But your customer, if you have a Pantone swatch palette, if they know what Pantone colors are, great, because at least you both have something that you can agree on as far as color goes. So you're both on the same page, especially if they're remote, if they can't come to your shop. But you use a different technique. You're probably going to be using the RGB palette. That's what I use for when I produce color, and that's also how I print. Now again, it's going to print in CMYK eventually because that's what the printer has, but I work in RGB because it's a much larger color gamut.
Yes,
And
that's true.
color
RGB
can be
much
confusing,
larger.
but
Yeah, RGB is much larger. You know, the Pantone was also created using, you know, certain color or certain paper, and they have uncoated and they have coated stock, but it was based on a certain paper. And when you have, you know, white is not white. I mean, there's many variations of white, and when you put color on white, different color background color is going to affect the color on top. So it's a lot more complex than just trying to say, here's a cross-reference chart. Like Sean says, color matching is really the key. You know, finding, because you can create charts all day long, and then you can match colors that you know you can create to other things by looking at them visually. So anyway, is there a schedule somewhere that tells you where the seminars are? I know it's on your website.
it is. Through 2013. I think our next seminar will be in Toronto,
Yes.
Canada, and that's coming up in early August. The next one will be in Phoenix, and I'm going to say that one is in October, I believe.
I'm not sure on that.
But go to our website. That'll give you the dates aren't for Phoenix are not up yet because that hasn't been finalized, but the Toronto one is. And then 2014, we haven't even started talking about where we're going to go in 2014, but we'll be going out there somewhere.
Yep. Well, you know, if you guys have a hard time finding it, the way I found it was I Googled JDS Sublimation webinar, boom, comes right up. So
Yeah.
Google's
Also,
a wonderful thing, you know.
Yeah. We also have a forum if you ever want to post a question. It's www.jdsindustries.com/forum.html.
Okay, there's still questions we haven't gotten to, but it is the top of the hour, and we need to wrap up here. I put, again, our email addresses here, and I apologize that some of you have some questions still out there, like some price questions, you know, on inks and things like that. Contact, you know, I would say contact Sean on most of these, because JDS is the dealer you'll be dealing with. Sawgrass, we're the manufacturer, and we can certainly help you. We have a nice tech support group, but we always encourage you to start with Sean, because Sean has a tremendous amount, or at least the group, the whole group, because Sean's got a great group that he works with. It's not just Sean. Okay,
we have a great team.
Yeah, we don't want to not, you know, emphasize Holly and all those wonderful people that work there with John. Okay, so the JDS team is there to help you with all those kinds of questions and stuff, and that's why you have Sean's email here. So please, if we didn't get to your question, email us, and we'll do our best to get you an answer back, because that's what it's all about, getting the answers that you need. So with that said, I'm going to wrap up. The freight train is pulling into the station, and so Sean, I'm going to say goodbye here and turn it back over to you. Any final words, and then we'll see everybody next time.
All right, thank you, Jimmy. Again, I want to thank everybody for tuning in. This is our first webinar. We've been on the road for quite a while doing our seminars, and we've been at a lot of trade shows, and we've met a lot of you people out there. But if you've never had a chance to come to the trade shows, or we haven't seen you at a seminar, and this is your way to connect with us, we appreciate that. Looks like we have some really good numbers. If you do have any questions, please give us a call. The number is 800-843-8853. And again, we have a full team. We have Holly and Lisa and Jerica and myself in the office Monday through Friday, 8 to 5 Central Time. With that, I'd like to thank you, and we look forward to doing the next webinar. Thanks again.